How's everyone doing today?
Doing great.
Happy to be here. Yeah.
Working on any cool projects?
Kinda. I'm working on a little something with one of my friends. The idea is to basically like build a platform for businesses to be able to offer products together via a subscription. So think, I don't know, let's say that you own a wine shop, I own a wine shop, everybody else in the call owns a wine shop. Maybe we could start like a monthly wine club where we each take turns providing that product. I'm using Next.js and Hasura, which I know that I love. So once we start talking about libraries and stuff, yeah, would love to talk about that stuff.
I love it. So actually, everyone mentioned, I think everyone kind of decided on a library. I know and that's okay if you haven't really decided. We're just going to chat. But I know I wanted to talk about Prisma, and I realized how little I knew about Prisma. So I'm just going to talk briefly about it, but learning quite a bit with combining it with Apollo Server. But what did everyone, what was your one library that you kind of just have fun working with and you wanted to talk about today? It's kind of like show and tell, isn't it? It feels like that. Go ahead.
I've been having a lot of fun with using Cypress for end-to-end testing lately. It's a really nice library because I come from a background where I wrote a lot of end-to-end tests that are very GUI based and very not GUI based, very terminal based and very just like, we're going to throw a bunch of words at you and we're going to hope you know what that means. And when we error out, we're going to explode and hope you know how to figure it out. But the nice thing about Cypress is they give you a really interactive interface. And it's really, really well designed to where you can actually see like snapshots of what stuff's happening in your tests and you can interact with them in really unique ways. So it really gives you control over what your tests are doing, which is kind of fun.
I already have a question for you. We're just going to dive into Cypress, and then we'll answer Nick's question, and we'll kind of move on. But so when we use Cypress, I kind of found that a lot of these snapshot tests that were getting produced kind of just clogged space. And I feel like, part of our team didn't really know how to utilize Cypress, and it kind of just felt like a lot of extra work that had little benefit. And this is probably my complete misunderstanding of it. And I know a couple other team members. So what's the best way to use Cypress in a minimal way where it doesn't clog up a lot of bandwidth with people kind of trying to write a bunch of tests with it?
Right. I think a big part of what you need to do is you just need to figure out how you want to organize them. You got to structure it in a way so that if inevitably when things fail, because you're setting these tests up to catch when something is going to go wrong or when something's going to break, that fix is as painless and as easy as it can be. Cypress does a lot of heavy lifting for you in terms of they give you built-in recordings and they give you things like Cypress Dashboard, which are really interactive and really easy to sort of see exactly what you're doing and exactly what you want to do with it. But you need to sort of set up the architecture in a way that you can easily flip a switch and have one selector switch it to another selector, have one workflow switch to another workflow. One thing that I love doing is I love using page objects. That's just, I have a history using them, and I found using a loose version of them where you have your app modularized up where you basically have pages of your app separated into their own little objects that have methods specific to workflows, specific to different pages and stuff like that. If you have some sort of orientation like that, it becomes a lot easier to both update your tests when a workflow changes and both just update it when a workflow changes.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. We probably didn't have some of that set up, to be honest. Who actually, does anyone write or kind of prefer writing a lot of front-end tests? Because I know a lot of people here have worked with React.
Yeah. Well, actually, at my company, we do use Cypress. It's kind of like our testing situation. It's a mix of Cypress for integration and end-to-end tests. We also use React Testing Library for unit tests, which I think work really well together. Basically, each of our components, they're all covered with unit tests. And then we go one step further. And for our features, that involve a bunch of components interacting with each other, or like a whole end-to-end flow. Then we have Cypress. And also, if we're about to put out a more involved feature, we'll also have a bit of manual testing that goes into it before we push it out. So that's a structure that I like. The role that I was at before my current team, our testing approach was test everything manually, because we were just moving very quickly. But I do like kind of the approach that we're required to have unit test coverage for everything using React testing library, which I've found to be a bit more intuitive than like Enzyme, which I used a bit before that. So yeah, I mean, that's a situation that I really like. And of course, working with React.
Okay. So you often like get this conversation. I guess I'm just digging into this a little bit. It's kind of a controversial topic to say, like, test everything on the front end in React. And a lot of people have different opinions on what you should test. And, like Dan, when we worked together, there were a lot of tests for like very core components. We had a lot of custom logic that would be tested. So I know most of us have had a few different positions. Does anyone lean on kind of like the side of like not testing everything and being a little bit more exclusive with what you do test on the front end?
I mean, my general approach is to like test everything in terms of like test all of the components that you write and all like the utility functions that you write. But I tend to not test like internal methods or like maybe like a utility function that an actually like exported utility function uses. So I guess the way that I like to think about it is like test. Like I like to write tests for things that might be used by something else, or said another way, like testing the API layer between like a component or a utility. Just because like, I don't know, when I hear test everything, which is like something that I've seen before, I've seen folks like, starting to write tests for things that aren't actually going to be called from the outside. And that just makes changing anything extremely like difficult, because then you have to, go and update any tests that might break. And those tests aren't actually testing functionality. They're just testing like internal logic. So yeah, I like to think about like what's actually like accessible from the outside, like what is the API layer for my React component or whatever, and just make sure that like given some input, the output is what I expect.
I feel like I just have a bad habit of really just leaning on testing a lot of custom logic on the front end. To me, I think even a couple members on our team had this mindset where we were just writing a lot of tests for extremely minor changes. And I think like if you really want to monitor, especially like styling changes, I think something like, something like snapshot testing is really the way to go. I don't know. I think I kind of just have a different opinion on testing, but I was just curious what other people's opinions were. But Dan, I want you to dive into Next.js because you have been talking about this. Hey, Hologram, we're back. How's it going? You've been talking about Next.js for the longest time, and I think I almost feel like you've wanted to vent to me for a very long time, and I want to hear it.
I guess, yeah, I'm trying to think of like what I wouldn't be venting about Next. If anything, I'd be venting about the general, I think like prevailing, I know it was prevailing at least like a little bit ago, but like the thought that like front end is so difficult like to get started, and that you have to like, like roll your own Webpack, set up your like Node and Express server, like all this stuff that like everybody complains about. And I mean, like you can, and it's definitely useful to like know how that stuff works, but there's like really cool tools out there that kind of do like all of that for you. And Next is the one that I tend to use because I just really like, so what is Next? Next is basically a framework built around React. So like a lot of folks think of React as like a front end framework. I tend to more just think about it as a view library. So there's a lot of things that React doesn't have. React doesn't have, for instance, routing. Like, you have to decide to use React Router or like any of the other routers that are out there. Server-side rendering can be kind of a pain to set up. I know that like Create React App is a solution to like get all this stuff, like set up from React already. But my tool of choice is definitely Next.js because I really like the routing structure. It's like file structure based. Server-side rendering is extremely easy. You get you can actually generate a static site. So like you don't just get server-side rendering. You can actually like build like your website into like static files, which load even faster. And I don't know how long ago they did this, but they added this new concept called API routes, which is basically like, it's not a React thing, but it's a way to like basically add like API endpoints to your website that you can call from the client. So with that, you can really easily hook up your Next.js project to like some database and just, you don't have to worry about cores or any of that stuff, which can be a pain. And Vercel is like their free usage tier is insanely generous. So you can seriously go from like not having a website to having a website hosted on Vercel, which is a fantastic hosting service, in like 30 minutes. And if you're lazy like me, you can use a like a backend as a service. The one that I've been using lately is Hasura, to also like one-click deploy to Heroku, hook those two things together, and seriously have like a pretty, like, we could go from nothing to like a functioning to-do app, for instance, in like an hour, potentially even like adding like authentication in there too. Like, I just love that there's like these companies out there whose jobs, or I guess like what they try to do is make our lives easier. And I think that Next.js is one that is absolutely knocking it out of the park in that regard.
Yeah, because I've even asked if I should be using Next.js, and I had a couple of requirements, but like, think about all the developers that kind of want to start a personal project and don't want to go through all that setup. And I'm definitely like, I'm lazy. I'm one of them. But I mean, that's initially why I kind of like just set up like a basic config, a template, so I didn't have to do it over and over again. I just optimized that. But I was looking at Next.js, and I want to ask you this question again. So it sounds like it has its routes set up, very easy to connect to a database. It sounds like it's a little bit more opinionated with the architecture on the front end, and just especially with the router. That's not always a bad thing. But I had asked you, like, what if you have kind of like a custom backend? You have a bunch of custom server logic. I've read that, you lose a lot of the benefits of what Next.js is optimized around. Would you still like, how hard would you recommend Next.js with a lot of custom backend logic?
Can you kind of explain what you mean by custom backend logic? Like, what would that be doing?
Yeah, for example, like creating an extra service or two. Like, I created an RSS feed aggregator, and it would just kind of like get my feed, correctly update the database, and make sure it was updating only the correct parts. But just like even potentially creating extra services. Do you feel like Next.js is still a good solution if you wanted to build kind of like a monolith? You didn't want to separate those services out?
Well, so I guess like depending on what you're trying to do, and if you say like, I want to build like this monolith where I have Node and Express like serving my client, and I also have the same like, or like a shared like Express server also like doing this side thing, like, well, that's not going to work. But like, I would question why you'd want to like couple your architecture in that way. But yeah, I mean, like something like what you just described is basically, so you've got your React site, right? And you want to be able to like build some sort of RSS structure from like the I guess like from the sitemap maybe. That's not necessarily something that you couldn't do with Next. So yeah, I guess what I would say is like, if you're starting to like couple all your things together to the point where like, like your website and this like other thing that is adjacent to it need to like know of each other's structures, I might recommend like rethinking how things are set up. Just, for the sake of like longevity and being able to like maintain this thing down the line.
Well, there's tons of arguments with monoliths versus, separating those services out. And maybe that's a more complex conversation. Yeah, probably one we won't really go down. So I guess my question, you have a good point. You really need to rethink, like, should you be combining these things? Like you said, do they need to be combined and know about each other's architecture and connections, stuff like that? Okay, I got a question for everyone. But before I do, I know I'm kind of just picking on you, Dan, because I'm just curious about Next.js. Are there any reasons why you shouldn't use Next.js, or can you think of any?
So the routing used to be a little bit more strict than it is now. So like in a few like previous versions, I would have said if you need like some really, specific routing logic, it might not be the best solution. They've kind of like made it more flexible lately. But yeah, if your use case has some like really specific way to like handle dynamic routes, it might not work. It's pretty much tied to React. If you don't want to use React, it is kind of, it just won't work out for you. I believe that there is, though, if you're a Vue user, I think Nuxt, like Nuxt, might be the Vue equivalent. Don't quote me on that, but that like there might be similar alternatives. And then like if you need a monolith, so the way that Next its API routes work is they're basically serverless functions. So like if you actually need like if you need something that has React and a separate server like together, and the server has to be like long running, like I guess it's not going to work out for you.
Okay. All right. I was just curious. Yeah, I don't know. I've looked into Nuxt. I don't know if it was paired with Vue. Maybe it was. I thought, because Nuxt is like a pretty opinionated framework, right? It's pretty bulky. Or am I thinking of a different one?
Honestly, like just because of the name, I think Nuxt is just Next for Vue. If anybody else, has any experience with it, I've never written a line of Vue code. Huge React fanboy, so not the right person to ask, I guess.
Yeah, that was my understanding. It's basically like Next for Vue.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm thinking of something, or am I thinking of Nest? There's one with a cat logo. Is that Nest? Someone help me. I'm not crazy. No? Okay.
No,
I don't know.
I haven't heard of it.
Okay. Then I'm just forgetting the framework. But so there was a question. I think I have PTSD from cores. I think we all do. So there was a question, like they wanted someone to argue why you should use Angular or Vue over React, because it's such like, especially when you're trying to become a developer, you always hear React, 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 React. And it's, one of the most marketable frameworks in the United States, which is a good enough reason for most people to learn it. So yeah, has anyone used Vue or Angular before?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say I use Angular at work.
Oh.
Yeah.
What?
You use it too? Or
so no, I guess I'm basically a React developer, but I was going to say I have dabbled a bit with Angular and then more recently Vue. And I think Vue is one that I want to kind of like, when I have time, work on like becoming pretty confident in. It is something that just the way it's structured, the way it works is pretty interesting to me.
Okay. Ben, I did not know you worked with Angular. Like, what's different about it?
So yeah, the whole Angular versus React debate is something I've sat in on a lot of times and been a part of a lot of times. I feel like a lot of times I fall into the realm of an Angular haters club just by a mission of I grew up using React. So, a lot of my experience with React is also mixed in with my experience of falling in love with the front end and falling in love with JavaScript in general, because that was just the first library I learned, and I learned it as I was learning how to become a programmer in general. But as I've worked with Angular a lot more, I've come to realize that there are really nice things about it, and the more I dig into it, the more those things become apparent. And the reason for that is, while React is very heavy on giving you flexibility and giving you a lot of availability to do what you need and to work with code the way you need, Angular is a little more rigid. It's a little more opinionated in the idea that they give you a bunch of libraries that you have to use with them just by nature of they provide you with a pretty heavy front end framework with a lot of technologies that if you know how to use them, they work really well, but you have to learn how to use them, and you have to learn how to work with Angular's opinions. And likewise, they make a lot of decisions for you on the front of how you're going to architect your app and how you're going to lay out your application. With items like your components, instead of being a single file, you're forced to have a basically directory for each of your components, where that directory is going to have an HTML, a CSS, a JavaScript, and a testing file. So in other words, they make a lot of choices for you, which is really uncomfortable if you know how to make those choices already, because naturally you have what you want to use and you have what you're used to using, so you want to go that route. But if you learn how to work with Angular and you use it to its best, I think it's still a really powerful framework with a lot of upsides.
Huh. And what do you prefer?
I still prefer React, just because I'm when I create a personal project, I'm very loosey-goosey. I like to just get up and running, like you said, Dan, and just I like to focus on the code part and less on the setup part and less on the orientation part. And just because I'm familiar with React and just because I know the ins and outs of React, I feel like I'm able to do that a lot quicker. But that being said, I'm much less inclined to recoil at the thought of working with Angular than I did when I first started, or than I did before I had approached Angular as a library. It's definitely a very steep learning curve, but you just got to learn the rules and work by them.
Okay, maybe that's not a bad thing, especially for newer developers, because a big question mark is conventions. And I remember I annoyed my teachers all the time at Full Stack Academy with how should I be writing it? And the number one advice is just solve the problem first. I would ask these conventions before I would even solve the problem. Okay, that's interesting, because it's pretty heavy duty. I have not actually looked at the conventions. I wonder if looking at kind of the architecture of some common Angular apps would teach you good conventions potentially to adopt with React.
Yeah, I will definitely say that I've become a better React developer by using Angular, just by nature of I now have a different way of looking at things. I now know, an alternative way to organize my app that's been thought out very heavily by, developers at Google and people who've focused very heavily on working with Angular.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Giving a lot of input into different patterns,
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of just Dana, I kind of want to lean on your idea. Next.js kind of just gets apps up and running. And I think I was interrupted by getting disconnected, but Next.js just gets apps up and running quickly. And I'm sure developers that are I'm going to go ahead and finish my blog. Sorry, I'm picking on you, Dan. But other developers that are I'm going to go ahead and do this app. And they're fully capable of it. It's just kind of a matter of time. And I think a lot of developers prefer just diving into the features and just building really cool stuff out and seeing it kind of bloom. So if you were to just jump into Next.js and quickly get an app up and get it running, Mark, I know you're an iOS developer, right? That's what you focus on?
No, actually. Right now I've been focusing on front end. And
wow.
So another pivot or pivot back.
Okay.
And the UI framework I use is actually Seismic.
Okay, we are definitely going to dive into that, because I literally have never heard of that at all. So I want to know more about that. So, okay, but you can answer this question though. If you were to build your next app, unless you're actually working on one right now, what would it be? What's your personal project?
Oh yeah, for me, I mean, my next app is going to use React. build website, and right now I'm just working to build a website for a group that I'm a part of, actually. So I'm using that and trying to just because like for the group that we're in, like we need to have a ability for like people to sign up. So that touches on like the full stack, setting up a database, setting up the REST APIs that will call that database, and having a front end so that a user can interact with all of that. And for me, like, I feel like this is kind of true to our whole group from what I've been hearing, right? But like, definitely I'm a React fan. And for me, actually, just one feature of React that I really like is React hooks, and specifically context, because it really like simplifies passing data between components. The UI framework I use for work is Seismic. And within that framework, the paradigm for passing data between components who maybe have like a parent-child relationship, it's unidirectional. And so, if you have a sibling, there's a lot more effort involved there, right? To like pass maybe some state from one sibling to the other, right? But with React and with React hooks and using context, you pretty much kind of have like this sort of global state object that everyone can kind of just import in and use. And so it just helps make it faster, in my opinion. So developing faster. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Really cool. Okay. I'm going to ask you more questions down the road, especially about data going both ways, because I'm kind of curious. But what else are people building, or what do you want to build? Let's assume like you had all the free time in the world. Maybe that would like open up your horizons to. Have you thought about like a personal project, or is anyone working on a personal project?
I have like a list of projects that I would like to build, and maybe I think I've got 2 React Native apps that I started working on. I think I abandoned one because I was like, oh, this next one's going to be a little simpler. Let me start working on that. And then I got wrapped up with things at work and like client projects. But that's something that like once my schedule is cleared up a bit, I would want to definitely dive back into React Native a bit, because someone who is like coming from just basic like React going into React Native, I mean, there's a lot of like the learning curve is already taken care of, but then there are some more specific things like styling that are a little bit trickier. Like with React Native, there's no CSS. Technically, it's all like CSS and JS. You write style sheets, or you can use like styled components or something like that. So that's what I would probably be working on.
Maybe I just missed it and I'm tired. What was the actual app though?
Oh yeah, that would probably be important. So this kind of simpler app that I was thinking of was basically a scheduling app, like for coming up with a weekly schedule. And it was just because I had tried finding a tool like that, where basically, as opposed to say something like Google Calendar, where you have, your, what you're going to be doing on each day. Well, what if you have like a weekly routine, that like, every Saturday at this time, I want to do that. Something that's like kind of very intentionally constrained. You want to keep the same routine going each week. So that would be kind of the point of the app, to say like, every Monday or every day at this time, I would want to do this, and you keep track of your progress, like check it off when you complete it. So something that would be good, I guess, for say someone who's like learning to code or, working out or doing anything like that. And something that I would use too.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. It's really tricky to try to build like a scheduling app for all different types of activities. And I find like a lot of apps are more successful when they build features based on like, maybe it is like working out for you, or maybe I was just thinking like, if you built it, maybe I'll like kind of poke you and try to convince you to build it for like aspiring developers. Cause me, I'm just always trying to help them, but that's okay. That's really cool.
Actually, Don, I guess because I don't feel like I really answered your question either, but given the context of saying like, oh, you have like a ton of time on your hands. Honestly, I think about a lot of projects that don't actually have like any real purpose, but would just be like a really cool idea, in my opinion. And I think it would be really fun to program a drone to do like image recognition and like have its own automated like flight paths. I don't know. I think that would be really fun.
I think it would too.
Yeah.
Because so you've definitely dabbled outside of web development quite a bit. Wait, did you ever finish that arcade game?
Yeah, I did actually.
Oh,
I did
that's
finish
so
that
cool.
one. And then after that, so that was, I developed that using the Godot game engine.
Okay.
And yeah, that was a cool project. And then after that, this year, actually, I've actually been digging into Game Maker, as the next game engine of choice that I wanted to like just kind of get my feet wet in. And if anyone is like considering game development, I definitely would recommend Game Maker. I think it has a lot of inbuilt tools, which is really nice.
That's
But
cool.
yeah, a lot of my projects, yes, some of them do go outside of development for sure.
And you even like you kind of just built it in this like old school arcade box too. Does it like sit in your house or?
Yeah, for now, I have it sitting in my house. I've actually presented that work like in galleries and stuff before, just because a part of my background, I'm also an artist. But I like built the arcade like with some wood and some tools, some soldering, and like put an arcade together. And then put that game in there just using like a Raspberry Pi, actually.
That is so. Wait, how big is it?
The game or
Yeah,
the arcade?
the whole box.
It's a tabletop arcade, so it's kind of like from your waist to your head, basically, in height.
Would it be too heavy to like for you to show us? I'm so curious. You don't have to. But
Yeah, it wouldn't fit like in the screen of this camera view.
all right, fair enough. All right, that's really cool. I'm glad you finished.
That's a great idea, though. Like making a handheld console. I haven't thought of that yet.
Ooh, that is good. I mean, you could basically make a Game Boy with a Raspberry Pi, can't you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you totally can.
Man, a lot of cool ideas. Ben, what are you working on? Or what do you want to work on?
Right. Yeah. But my latest project is just stacking up the Raspberry Pis that I've set aside and have yet to find a use.
I have one of those.
Right. I really want to get into something physical like you, Mark, because it's fun, you know, being able to write code and see that affect the world. I've been making a lot of mini projects like that by just like making little jokey Discord bots whenever I'm bored, because like I recently discovered that the Discord API takes like 10 seconds to start up and get running with. You can make like a fairly featured Discord bot with what essentially amounts to what would have been a very simple Express server, or the equivalent of like a very simple Express server. It's super nice, super easy to get set up with, and yeah, I think it really shows that there's a lot of really neat technologies out there that you can just pick up, run with, and get a super simple, super tiny project that can also do something very impressive out with, you know, just a little bit of logic and a little bit of JavaScript.
That's really cool. What do you mean by jokey? Where are they funny?
My most recent project was I created a robot that just sends out dog pictures to people unless one of my friends in the Discord channel talks, in which case it'll say something to him specifically. So we're slowly trying to convince him that he's going crazy by having this robot talk to him.
Okay. Yeah, at Full Stack Academy, you were the one that convinced everyone to like change their name to Ben, right?
Yeah, me and a couple other fellows they work with you now, Mark, at ServiceNow, right?
Yeah.
Created Benify, where it took everyone's name on campus and it changed it to like Ben in whatever verse their name was. We had everyone change their Slack names to it as well. So for 3 days on campus, everyone was just Ben or some variation of Ben. It was fun.
Yeah, so we know what kind of apps you build.
Yeah.
And I think it's hilarious. Okay, I didn't know Discord took... do you just use like a library like TMI.js or like maybe that's just like Twitch, but is it just a library that spins up a Discord server really easily, or is it just easy to?
It's their own API. They have, I believe it's just Discord.js is what their library is called, or it might just be an abstraction of our API. But it's literally just you set up a couple listeners, one to connect to the server and one to react to whatever messages are sent, and you're ready to go. From there, it's just writing JavaScript logic, and once you start it up, it's online and logged in.
Okay.
It was surprisingly easy to get set up with, and surprisingly powerful too.
That's really cool. What are you working on, Dan?
Right now, just working on a side project. The basic gist of it is it's a platform for multiple businesses to come together and offer a product together. So just trying to encourage collaboration, I guess, and maybe not seeing competitors as competitors, but maybe as partners that you can actually benefit two ways with.
How do you do that? What do the features look like that allow you to do that and change that?
Honestly, I'd love to talk about this maybe once it's closer to
Okay.
release. But that's really the basic gist of it is just being able to, make an account, go to other folks within your industry, see if they want to come together and offer products in some way, shape, or form. Once there's more there, and honestly, it's pretty far along. But once it's more there, I'd love to talk more about it.
Okay, that's completely fine. For me, I'm just building my podcast website. I found that a lot of podcast platforms don't really have a lot of customization. I do this weird thing where I split it into YouTube and Buzzsprout and integrate a bunch of different stuff. So I find that I'm very slow with it. And I say, everyone should be working on a personal project, and I am not finding the time for it. But one thing I do want to jump into, because I finally get to dive back into GraphQL. We're going to talk about that in a second. But Mark, you wanted to mention kind of more about your framework a little bit, right? It was the framework.
Yeah. So the company I work for is called ServiceNow, and we have our own UI framework that we use. It's called Seismic. Honestly, a lot of it's very much in the style of React. But then they have different paradigms here and there. And I guess the one that I highlighted was just the one direction of the passing of data. So I think that, in one sense, I think that as a paradigm, I guess potentially reduces risk of data changing when you don't necessarily want it to, or one component accidentally changing state without you noticing as a developer. And I think that's the risk of context in React, where if any component can tie in itself into a state object and mutate it, it might be harder to keep track of, right? But I just think that that's just so much more convenient just to be able to go and do that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because usually if you really did want to log and debug a lot of that data flow, that's something that Redux could do. Context allows things to be connected a little bit more than what it was. But is there what I haven't done? I haven't really set up a lot of logging in React specifically since I've tossed Redux. Do they provide any convenient debugging features with data flow in React?
I might pass that question to the group too, because I haven't touched React that much recently to know.
Dan, do you know?
Can you maybe rephrase the question a little bit? So React is just the view. It's basically a view state machine. State goes in, props go in, UI comes out. So I guess to directly answer your question, no, React does not provide anything specifically to debug auth, but there are plenty of ways to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, React is like the not batteries included framework, right? So you got to bring your own batteries.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure because, to be honest, I haven't been keeping up with like the latest version of React. I was just kind of curious. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I'm just curious. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, no, sorry, this thought just came up. So like thinking about auth and thinking about like different ways of like implementing it. I mean, at the end of the day, what you'd be debugging would really be like the data that came back from the server. And lately, I've been using what is it called? React Query, I believe. So like in the topic of like libraries that we really like, I've been having a super good time with React Query. It's very thin. Like there's it's pretty bare bones, but at the same time, it lets you kind of like build your own structure that ends up letting you do a lot. And its developer tools and its like debugging tools are really cool too. So you can see like, you know, if a request failed, why it failed, and yeah. So if I was trying to debug like what was going on with like authentication, for instance, I'd probably lean on like my API query layers debugging tools in order to get a better sense of what's going on.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think that's I think just debugging authentication in general can kind of be a little bit tricky. Hands up, who here has used GraphQL? Okay, so pretty much everyone almost. That's what are your thoughts on it? Because yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Like, what are your thoughts on GraphQL?
I like it. No, I can say that, but no, at my current job and my role before it, so I've really only had like two, professional roles, developers. So at both of these roles, we've used GraphQL, currently we use like Apollo client on the front end, which has been great, and we have also been since GraphQL was implemented fairly recently. At my company, a little bit before I joined, we're also like in the steady migration from Redux over to GraphQL. So a lot of our logic that was previously handled with Redux, we're now using like Apollo client to handle, especially with just a lot of the caching. So that way, like our data is kept there. Like with Apollo, it also gives you some additional like built-in benefits like data normalization, which is a bit better than what Redux provides. But yeah, I mean, Apollo is like only, one option for actually like dealing with GraphQL, but it's one that I've used and it's worked pretty well for me.
Yeah, same here. I've definitely used Apollo. Has anyone worked with GraphQL on the back end? Like, have you set it up? Like, or just kind of
I've set it up through Hasura, which is like all UI based. So no, but by having to go through that process of like building tables and like hooking up like the relationships between like table A and table B, and then seeing the GraphQL like output that it produces, like I feel like I have a pretty good sense of like how GraphQL like works. Which has been kind of nice. Obviously not nearly as much as somebody who's actually like written their own like resolvers, but I think, honestly, like to me, Hasura was a really good like stepping stone into understanding like what the heck GraphQL is, because you like as mostly a front end developer, like I'm the one like putting it together, and then like I think that kind of gave me like, since I created the tables, then like everything just like the system that I was building like kind of made sense. Whereas originally when I started looking into GraphQL, I was like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, me too. Interesting. So the name is Hasura?
Hasura. I want to say, Hasura. Let's see. It's HASURA.io. Yeah, it's basically just like what they were originally is a GUI to create a Postgres database, and then they basically introspect that Postgres database and generate GraphQL, a GraphQL API for you.
Okay. That's interesting. I think I feel like it's a really, really handy tool for someone that's especially trying to build more front-end apps and get into front-end. It just seems like it simplifies a lot of the back-end development, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And what's cool too is that like, so it gives you basic CRUD, like very like quickly and easily, like setting that up is super easy. But then there are ways to like bring in your custom business logic if you need to. And my general experience with it was like, the bare bone features are super easy to understand. And then like the more advanced features, you kind of learn them as you need to. So like you don't have to like go learn this whole entire system all at once. Also, one really nice thing is that you can so via the UI, you can literally go make your table, like, you create your Hasura sandbox and whatever, go add a table, go maybe create another table, like add your relationships. And then there is a GraphQL Explorer built in where you can just start querying like directly from the UI. So at least for me, like a lot of times the workflow is like set everything up in Hasura, write my little query, make sure that it works, and just copy and paste that query into my project because I just verified that it works.
That's really convenient. I've never heard of that either. Is it new?
Honestly, like this is one of those things where I feel like I know, like I've met folks that have like worked with it. Everybody that I know that has worked with it has either like a positive opinion of it or is absolutely in love like I am. But yeah, it has not gotten like the attention that I think it deserves. But that said, like I do see it come up in like Hacker News and other like developer forums. And yeah, anytime it comes up, people are like, this tool is great. So yeah, definitely check it out if you want like a really easy way to set up a server and an API, especially if you're using GraphQL.
Do you feel like it's really simple for junior developers to pick up?
I have not seen an easier way to set up a server, basically.
Okay, that definitely answers that question. Okay, so yeah, I think like I just kind of wanted to mention GraphQL because one thing I would want to say, like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Ben and Mark, when you were kind of mentoring people at Full Stack Academy or teaching, but a lot of people, in my opinion, bite off more than they chew. And GraphQL, I remember in our cohort, one group tried to tackle GraphQL for one of their apps, and it's like setting up the backend is painful when you haven't really done it yet. It's super friendly for front-end developers, and it's amazing just requesting only the data you need. I love GraphQL Playground. I absolutely love it. It's so convenient just to be able to see that schema and just everything in front of you. Feel powerful. But it is kind of like a pain to set up. Would you like, because my next question is going to be, I'm going to say the next question, but would you recommend like learning GraphQL for potential full stack developers? Is it worth learning as a junior developer? Or do you think maybe like just sticking with like a RESTful API and being able to connect to that is a better step?
Right. I've had I haven't seen as many students use GraphQL, but I've pushed a couple of students towards learning Neo4j, which is just a graph type database, an alternative to SQL in general. And I think it's really nice because just the philosophy of a graph database and the idea that you're no longer treating people as spreadsheets and people as columns on a sheet. You're now attributing relations, and you're simplifying a lot of these what might be complex queries into just relationships between people and how those people connect. It gives you a lot of power, in other words. And I think that's very useful. And being able to, even if you don't make direct use of it at your company, being able to make that argument of, hey, this is why what we're going to have to give up if we're going to tackle this type of schema or this type of schema, or rather, this is what another type of database would look like. Being able to make those architectural arguments is very powerful, especially in the interviewing phase when you're, sitting in front of someone and you have to justify why you might have made what decisions you made in an app you picked up. And if you're a junior developer, a lot of those decisions might just be some variation of it was the first thing I learned or the first thing I found. So having some complexity and having some decoration to those answers is very useful. And any experience is a good experience, but yeah.
That's a really good point.
It's a graph, but Neo4j is a lot of fun to work with, and I see a lot of the power of using a graph type schema or graph type database. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. So basically what you're encouraging is people to, it almost feels like you're encouraging people to not shy away from complexity so that they're able to kind of tell and explain to the interviewer exactly like why they're using what they're using. So it might not even necessarily be a GraphQL or a graph database, but just something where it makes more sense. So for like an example, like a lot of coding boot camps teach Mongo, but they don't like, Mongo is so easy just to like toss data in and retrieve it and like not think about the relationships at all. And, Mongo is very useful, but a lot of people, like, in my opinion, that's why like graph database is a really interesting choice. I would say that, or even like a relational database, just to like understand how that data is connected and think about like the structure of your database initially is really important. But I feel like I've shied away from the graph database. I haven't considered it for any of my apps. I think that's good advice. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely really nice, especially since, as I become gain some sort of more experience as a developer, one of the things that I saw popping up a lot more is dependencies being awkward to manage and just overloading apps with dependencies. And it's later on started to bite me in the back. So it's this idea that you want to pick up libraries and you want to be very enthusiastic about what libraries you pick up, but you also want to take some time to realize, hey, even though I'm using React, this is what I'm giving up, or this is what I'm gaining by using React, and this is why I want to use it. So you're not walking those decisions blindly, and so you're not just overloading your application with anything that looks cool just because it looks cool and it's fun to put in, because there are a lot of taxes that come with that aren't immediately apparent,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very true. Okay, I didn't prepare you for this question. What is like the one framework or library that you hate? Like absolutely hate?
I don't like hate any framework, but one that I think is like questionable is Lodash.
Interesting.
Which I think that Lodash, like, it has some really great tools. But then when I see it in a project, I tend to just see like one method, one like Lodash get, right? I'm not really seeing like that much utilization of the full feature set of the framework. And I mean, what Lodash get does is it's a null checker, right, for variables. And I feel like if that's all you're going to use it for, why not just build your own helper method? So yeah, no hate, but I'm just like, if you're just going to, like buy a sword to use the hilt.
That's actually an issue I believe that we had at my last company, where we were not utilizing Lodash nearly enough. Or I think maybe, was it Lodash? I think it was, because we ended up tossing some library. I don't know, but you make a really good point with that. Cool. I'm going to say mine, Sequelize. Does anyone like Sequelize?
I recently started using it.
Okay.
For me, I was just like, setting up like the back end and like wanting just a quicker way to like set up models and just a simple CRUD, right, from getting data from the database. And I think maybe like for startup project, you don't have to learn SQL or kind of struggle through that. So I think that's the benefit of it. Maybe longer term, it makes a lot more sense to transition away from it. But yeah. Why do you what's your pain point for SQLize?
Because I don't think the documentation does a really good job of like explaining what your instance contains, or like the helper methods with just when you're dealing with models or instances. Maybe this is me, like the documentation has always been a pain point and they've updated it. I just don't, I don't know. I have not heard of anyone that just like goes into SQLize and says like, wow, this is really upfront and like I completely get what's going on. And that, so I think it's the documentation that I have an issue with. It's really powerful. And you can like build a lot of your models and helpers in a way where you could actually like replace that ORM with another ORM, and kind of like still have a lot of that similar functionality, and it integrates really well. But you know, that's just thinking, try to be smart about how you write your methods. But either way, like I just feel like there have been so many times where I look at the documentation, it says it's going to do this, and it doesn't. It does something different. Maybe I'm just poorly reading that documentation, but that's why I dislike it. And I'm talking about like I've used this for years, and I've given SQLize so many chances, and I don't know. That's why I adopted Prisma kind of when I switched to GraphQL. But yeah, is anyone with me on that, or am I like completely alone?
I'm with you. I remember struggling through those docs. This is rough.
It really is.
The most common pain point I see with people is just navigating those docs. It's become sort of a joke among the community. I feel that the skill set for learning SQLize isn't learning SQLize itself. It's learning how to get through those docs.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually really true and sad to think about. Yeah. Okay, so what I kind of want to do, like time has kind of flown. I wanted to get a feel. I really want to get a feel for like what everyone's working on, because I think, and maybe I should have explained this initially, I think a lot of junior developers, they don't, they kind of just want to know what actual software engineers use. And they want to get a feel for, especially when you have like opinionated frameworks and libraries that you lean on, they want to get, they want like some sort of reference to learn healthy conventions and healthy like structure for architecture. And like a lot of junior developers struggle with this. So I think it was kind of cool. Just like, I also wanted to nerd out and like just hear what, got you excited. I know all of you probably work really hard and you're all very dedicated to your job. So I know it's hard to like work on side projects and stuff like that, but it's kind of just interesting, like that developers form this like, okay, this is what I work with at work. But usually their personal projects are going to adopt like maybe 90% of what they use for work because it's really convenient. But they always have like that extra library they always want to try because like it's a convention they don't get to use at work. It's going to get vetoed, when they put up a PR. And so it's just interesting to hear kind of what actual software engineers use. But what I want to do, so this is like, my podcast is about helping like junior developers and stuff like that. So I appreciate you sharing all that. Now, like if we could give, and feel free to ask any questions in chat, but if we could give like a main piece of advice, like final piece of advice for junior developers, like what could each of us say? Feel free to think about it.
I'm happy to start on that. So you're saying what's a main piece of advice for a junior developer?
Yeah,
but basically. Like open-ended like that? Okay.
It's pretty open-ended, yeah.
Okay, perfect. My open-ended advice this time around is to read other people's code. One thing that I think is not, it's talked about, but I think it could always use a little bit more emphasis. When you enter the job force, you're not building an app from scratch. And I think in that moment where you're trying to get your foot in the door, probably most of the projects that you've worked on are ones that you started and finished. And so because you're starting from scratch, you're right, there's not any other code for you to look at. But when you join a job, the app is like, there's some app that's made. And from that point, you're just like improving upon it, whether you're adding new features or refactoring parts of the app. But even when you're adding new features, you're still respecting, the patterns that already exist within the code base, and other things that are going on. So I think maybe that means looking at some open source projects and reading through those. But just really get used to looking at code, reading it, and like cracking the code. It's a really helpful skill. Yeah.
So like kind of just a reference, because a lot of people struggle, like where do I look at other people's code? When I was first trying to become a developer, I'd look at these open source projects, but they were overwhelming. And I feel like I didn't know like where to look or what projects to look for. So if you had to recommend like advice for someone to narrow down an open source project that they could easily understand, but that would also help them grow, like how do they do that?
That's a good question. Honestly, maybe like I haven't tried it myself, so I'd be curious to try this myself actually. But like if you're working on a personal project and you're using some framework, right, when you download the Node package to your app, go into Node modules and read the source code for that framework. I think that might be a good place to start. And try to understand, like, if you're using a method in it, how that method is functioning.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. Okay, cool. What else?
Yeah. I think that's an awesome point, Mark. In building off that, just read your own code. Read the projects that you wrote a week, a month, a year ago, and try to figure out what decisions you made, and try to justify why you made those decisions or why you shouldn't have made those decisions. When you're first starting out, you're going to write bad code. You're going to architect apps weirdly. You're just going to make a lot of weird choices by nature. You haven't made those choices yet. And the only way to get better at making those choices is to just keep making them, keep working on projects, and keep churning things out. So you can analyze that, and you can say, hey, this is why it doesn't work. Or this is why I shouldn't have gone down this route, or this is why I should have gone down this route. A lot of times I like to say my learnings as I've gotten better at code have come from what I call trauma-based development, where I just, if I make a bad choice, I'll have to struggle with that choice for a little bit. Maybe I'll miss a parenthesis, or I'll just use a library that isn't geared towards what I actually need to use it for. And it's only through going through that process of figuring out, okay, why is this library working the way it did? Why is my code working the way it did? Or why are my assumptions wrong in this instance, that I'm then learning how to, one, navigate documentation, look for those bugs, but also two, why I have like a legitimate reason why I shouldn't have made that choice in the first place. So yeah, just don't be afraid of writing bad code. Don't be afraid of going back to spend time to review your own code. You don't have to be creating something new or writing something new to get better. You just have to be focusing on it and thinking of it, even if it's from a philosophical point of view. Just, you need to think about those choices and consider them.
That's really good advice, because a lot of people don't really, some people will include projects that have older conventions, and they were at a lower skill level, and they would include it, and it would be brought up in the interview. And so that's why I think a lot of people are like shy to ever include their old projects on their portfolio. But like kind of what you're saying is you could grow tons from just being able to like not just look at your code, but say like, why was this structured poorly? And like you could also, a really cool thing, because a lot of people struggle when they're self-taught, they struggle to see growth. They struggle to see progress. And so you could look at those old projects and just like kind of spot just even like the way you would structure your app is probably going to drastically change, within a few months. And being able to spot that, you kind of go, wow, okay, I guess I am kind of moving forward, because, the job search process is really self-defeating. And like, if you just like, that's your measurement of like how good you're doing, it's like, that's going to be so self-destructive. You have to look at your growth as a software engineer, because eventually you're going to get that position. But that's cool. It's because it's almost like, you hear like, well, if you want to like really reinforce what you're learning, like kind of teach it to this rubber duck. But like, you're almost kind of saying a form of that where like, you're going back through old code and kind of explaining like why it's poorly structured and how you would make it differently. It's just like another strategy to think about it in a complex manner to like reinforce, your new patterns that you learned. So yeah, that's really good advice. I like it.
is you can spend forever, writing something new and creating something new. But if you don't actually figure out, hey, did this work or did this not work? And you don't formulate a reason on why that is, you are losing a lot of the potential takeaway from that experience.
Okay. That's, yeah, I think that's great advice. Cool. What else?
I guess something that I would stress for like beginner and junior developers is, just the importance of working on and building projects. This is kind of like a point that does get like harped on a lot, and it's just something that was really important for me also. Just for example, say, it can feel hard. Like you can get stuck sometimes if you think like, okay, well, I want to like build a new app, build a project to learn new things, but I don't know like what I should be learning. So one thing that helped me a lot was when I was starting out and going through a lot of tutorials. With tutorials, you get that rush of like, oh, I was going through a project with the instructor and look at what I built. Or like, look at what like we built or what I followed along with. So something that like really helps with that is, say as soon as you finish a big project, whether it's like a YouTube tutorial or a Udemy course, try building something that is close to like what you just built in that project, but like with a twist, something that forces you to retrace your steps. And you can reference the original project like for some of those patterns, but it's something that is original enough that you are really pushing yourself to just do a lot of original stuff. Like I guess basic example off like the top of my head is like, say you're going through a tutorial and it's an app that like randomly generates a quote from like a quotes API, and then you change it so you're actually just like fetching a cat picture from like a cat picture API, something like that. It's also a good opportunity, like if you say like, oh, I want to try doing this, but like with a different library, like they use Sequelize in it, and I don't want to use that. I'll use something else. Just working with that and kind of within the context of like, oh, I know this is like a doable project, but I'm going to put like my own twist on it. That's something that like helped me just become a stronger developer as I was starting out. Okay.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And maybe I guess kind of what I'm getting out of that is don't like build a project kind of like with a twist, but that has similarities so you can kind of reinforce just what you've learned. And like you come from the coding bootcamp world too, where, after the coding bootcamp, like a lot of information jumbled around. And I think like building, like, especially maybe even like building something that requires that similar structure. And you kind of, that's how you eventually form like kind of like a project template to carry over to your other projects. But like maybe just repeating a lot of like the fundamental template stuff will really help reinforce a lot, but you can like come up with a new twist to it. You can also like, it doesn't have to just be like something minor, like changing the API that you grab, but it could be like just adding actual like additional features and just, I wonder, like, I'm trying to think, I think this is why, like if you want something just unique enough to be useful, and it could also be a portfolio project where it's not too similar. I almost think like, and I kind of want your opinion, Zach, do you feel like when you are thinking about building the next project, do you think about like building a project people will actually use? Do you think like, like for example, maybe someone built a healthcare app that grabs just health or just some sort of health related information from this API. And then like all of a sudden now you're going to build like, I don't know, like a scheduler or something where like maybe, man, I'm not giving good examples, but I guess my question is, how different do you feel like your next project should be?
I guess for me, kind of like, when I'm brainstorming what my next project is going to be about, like, is it something that I want people to use or something that like is just for fun? It kind of like, for me, it kind of depends on my own like confidence level in like myself as a developer. Like, am I building this project to learn a new technology and like get better at something else that I know? Like that could sometimes be like the primary objective. Or is it because like when I was talking about the scheduling app before, that was something that I thought like it would be a very useful thing. Most importantly, I would want to use it. And if I wanted to use it, I'm sure that like some other people would. But also at the same time, I had a bit of experience with React Native, but also wanted to get some more practice. So kind of like combine both. And I guess when you are starting out, like at least my opinion, if it were me, I would focus first on working on whatever project would make you a stronger developer. But there's always a chance, like if you do have an idea that it feels like it's something that you're able to latch onto, whatever gives you that motivation, that's what you should hang on to. So whether it is like, I want to learn this technology, or here's this like app that seems like it would be really useful for a lot of people. It might be challenging, but it's something that I can really stick with and pursue. And in the process of building this out, regardless of whether it succeeds or fails, I'll learn a lot in the process. It's, yeah, having that thing to like that motivation or that objective to drive you is really important.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It almost sounds like for beginners, you're kind of encouraging people to like not go too crazy with each project, and like incrementally, like if you do want to learn a new library, then go ahead and add that library on. But like really, it's okay for the projects to at least be a little bit similar, so you can reinforce a lot of what you're learning.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like one or two projects when I started out that like originally the scope was a lot larger. And then like after a couple of days, like there was one that I was stuck a couple of days with like trying to find the right music API to pull like this artist info, and it wasn't working out. And then at one point I realized, you know what, it's not worth focusing on like this one particular aspect. I just changed something and then was able to keep moving ahead. But yeah, because it was at that early stage, I was just starting out with React.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. How about you, Dan? So
I feel like Zach kind of said what the same thing that I think is super important, which is just in short, if you try to bite off like too much at once in terms of like what new thing that it is that you're using, at least in my experience, that's been like a super quick and easy way to just drop the project altogether. So like, if I was trying to learn, let's say that I was trying to learn Svelte and I wanted to implement like a graph database and like all these other things that I hadn't used before, I feel like there's got to be some way to like visualize the math, but at some point it's so difficult that you just like completely get demotivated, so you drop it. So yeah, I'm definitely a huge fan of the general advice of incrementally adding things that you're learning, because once you hit that wall and once you're like, oh man, I can't do this, then projects die. So ditto that. I would also say like when you're learning new technologies, this one is so obvious, but just like read the documentation, like really understand how the thing that you're working on works. Not only so you learn whatever it is that, whatever library that you're trying to use, but also because being able to read documentation is a skill. And the more you do it and the better you become at it, the faster you can understand the next thing. And I'm in a handful of developer Slack channels, and a lot of times folks will just ask questions. And I can, like, having not ever used this technology before, I just got really good at being able to like Google, read docs, and then like come up with an answer. And it's just like, it's like learning how to help yourself. So yeah, I would say really like, especially when you're more junior, just like read the docs, understand your tools. And with that practice, you'll eventually be able to like pick up new tools like faster and more efficiently.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So many people shy away from documentation initially. Well, to be fair, there's a lot of bad documentation. But yeah, go ahead. Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
Whatever you can't hear me?
Okay, now I can.
Cool. Yeah, so like if you're using something that has straight up bad documentation, I would question how good that tool is. So yeah, a lot of the tools that I really enjoy, oh my gosh, it's like best in class docs, and I almost like enjoy reading them, because actually even back to the whole idea of like, how do you learn how to like write good code? Like reading good docs and like really like reading docs that explain APIs that like make sense intuitively, like that's good code. Like that's going to teach you like good practices. So like, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that reading the code itself is helpful sometimes, but sometimes you can just look at the API and be like, oh man, this API just makes sense. I should write code that also makes sense. So yeah, that's actually something that I hadn't thought about before, but I do think I've actually become a better developer by looking at other people's APIs expressed via docs, and try to like adapt those or adopt those patterns.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I wish, maybe I'm just going to be lazy and like tack onto that with my advice. Yeah, I'm going to be lazy. I feel like, Dan, your advice is really good for reading documentation to kind of learn. And maybe, you can mix that with Mark's advice. But like, if you're really trying to learn conventions and learn better code, man, so many people reference their tutorials. So many people, like, I just remember going through Treehouse for so long, and they did such a good job of actually teaching the content that I would get done with the content and really feel like I knew it. And then I'd get done with the course, I'd try to build something, and like nothing stuck, like almost absolutely nothing. And then I would constantly go back through those tutorials, and I felt like I only got I was able to reinforce just a little bit, just a tiny bit, and I had to keep going back. It got to a point where I'm like, I spent so much time with Team Treehouse, I had nothing built. I felt like I really couldn't apply it. I had such little confidence with it. And it wasn't until I started thinking about code in a more complex manner and really trying to understand docs and that, like you said, that's a good place to sometimes learn good conventions. Things didn't start clicking until like I finally put that tutorial down, forced myself not to reference it, and started working on the projects. And obviously I got stuck over and over and over, but looking up documentation, I feel like that solidified things a lot more than tutorials. So yeah, I'm kind of stealing your advice. So that was good advice, Dan. Thank you. So, okay, I think that's it. I don't want to keep people too long, but like I said, I want to give people a feel for technologies, kind of just technologies actual software engineers are interested in. And yeah, I also want to hear some of the frustrations with technologies and feel like I'm not the only one that sometimes hates bad documentation or bad libraries. So that's also reassuring. But, one thing I didn't really introduce any of you when we started the podcast episode. We kind of just jumped into things. So let's kind of go around real quick and finish up and just mention, like, if people want to reach out to you, where could they reach you? And like any, if you're building an app and you want users, or you write a blog, anything like that, feel free to shout it out. But Zach is actually someone that we did a Codesmith review. So if you are considering coding boot camps, definitely check that out. I'm going to do my best to link those cards to the actual videos. But yeah, Zach's a returner. Appreciate you having you back on. But yeah, where could people reach you, Zach?
The easiest place would be on LinkedIn. So if you're watching this, you see my name, you could just look that up, Zach Haluza.
Perfect. Thanks. And Mark, yeah, I don't know who he is. I don't know how he got in here, but Mark, I've heard has, Mark's kind of like, Mark, you're really quirky with the things that you build. Like when we talk, man, I miss our meetups at Full Stack. I really do. It's been so long.
Yeah.
But we would talk about like, I remember you talking about building this like arcade machine a long time ago. And I was really intrigued by it. I wasn't sure if you were going to finish it, but you always you came from an art background. You were incredible with mentoring other people. And but you always had these like cool little ideas that you want to build. And honestly, that drone that you want to build, that's going to be really cool. I want to see that finished. When this pandemic is over. Does Chicago allow you to fly drones?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to just check on that to see what the exact rules are. But I have seen some drones fly, like at beaches and things. Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. But yeah, Mark, if people want to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
Yeah, similar to Zach, LinkedIn is probably the best place to reach me. And my name isn't displayed right there, but it's Mark A. Blanchard on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah, you threw me off for a long time. But so thanks. All right. And Ben is another one that helped mentor me at my meetup. Known him for a long time. And he's actually helped host a couple of recent events with the meetup. But yeah, incredible mentor, really, really good teacher. Really nice guy. I remember, so we actually did, and I'll link it above. So Mark and Ben both did previous podcast episodes. We were kind of just like, it was one of my first episodes, and we just brought up topics and we started talking. That's kind of cool. But Ben, I remember, I'm going to link both episodes, but Ben did an episode where we reviewed Full Stack Academy. Are you still an instructor there, part-time?
Yeah. So I'm actually teaching their part-time program in Chicago. We have a partnership with UIC right now. So I'm leading the part-time UIC program at Full Stack.
Okay, really cool. He's an excellent teacher, so you should definitely follow him. But yeah, where could people reach you, Ben?
Yeah. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, like everyone else. That's a very good spot to find me. I'm happy to answer any questions, whether it be about Full Stack, just helping out with finding, bootcamp in general, or with the bootcamp or post-bootcamp experience, or even just, finding first couple jobs. I'm very, whatever anyone needs, always happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, one thing I mentioned, like you'll notice in the episode, he's incredibly nice. It was hard for me to get him to be critical with Full Stack. It was so hard. He's a really nice guy. And then Dan, worked with Dan for my second position. I always considered you like a mentor, really bright person. And you were like the one person that I could just sit there and kind of like argue with, like conventions, and just like, and you'll like flat out call me out on all this stuff. And like, we just like come up with like a really constructive solution at the end. So it was really fun just having those conversations, and I kind of missed them, but yeah. So Dan, where could people reach you?
Yeah, I guess just want to say, I miss those convos too. So I super appreciate being able to interact like this and get to still talk tech, which is kind of wild. But yeah, like everybody else, you can just add me on LinkedIn, Dan Cortez. Having been on the show before, like some like other people have like added me, like reached out, asked questions. Like, yeah, I'm super responsive. I really do love helping out. So yeah, if you want to get in touch, just add me on LinkedIn.